being that it's the first session, we figured a 101 sort of introductory style course to our work as green restoration Ireland and what we've been doing with Paludiculture. That 101 introductory style is a great place for everybody to kind of start. We are going to be doing more episodes or sessions throughout this series on various topics in relation to Paludiculture. So make sure you're signed up for our newsletter so you will know when these new sessions come up. And we're really excited to be kicking this off. Today, Dr. Doug McMillan, Dr. Bastian Mulliman will be going through pretty much the larger details, and then Philippa Ferez will be wrapping it up at the end. You'll see, Doug, if you would mind, Doug is driving the slideshow today, so we're going to be bugging him a lot. But we have a little agenda. We'll be talking about our work with peatlands. We'll be talking about peatlands in Ireland. Doug will be leading that. Bastian will be leading our discussion of Paludiculture. We are so excited to have Adrian Egan and Donny Regan to join us. They are Ireland's Paludiculture farmers. Our first Paludiculture farmers is so exciting. We absolutely love them. So they'll be sharing some of their insights. Philippa will leading some information on the risks and mitigation of doing these trials, and also speaking on how GRI works. And then I will be leading a little Q&A at the end. Before we kick off, just a couple pieces of housekeeping, and then we are on the road. First, that's a Zoom meeting. Please be on mute. We will try to respectfully and lovingly mute people that are not on mute, and we can kind of hear in the background. But please have yourselves on mute. We are recording the session, and we will be sharing this YouTube channel. We'll be creating a playlist, and then we will be sharing the recording out after the webinar. And then last bit, questions. Please drop your questions in the chat. We'll be answering any of them as possible at the end of the webinar, but any questions that we can't get to, we will be answering with our follow-up email that includes the recording. So with that being said, Doug, take it away.
Okay, right. Thank you very much for that intro, Kayla. And yeah, again, just like to welcome everybody here. We have a very diverse range of people from not all from Ireland, from other countries as well. So welcome our international guests also. Very pleased to have you here, having the opportunity to listen to some of our experiences that we've acquired in our work. So again, I suppose, forgive those of you that know this already, just to give a bit of context before we lead into the proper discussion on Paludiculture proper. Just, I suppose, Irish peatlands. There's about 1.5 million hectares, 21% of our land area, and of that, about 1.2 million hectares is degraded. And doing the maths in terms of what Bord na Móna owns, what Parks and Wildlife manages in Cuilche, we estimate there's about 77% of our peatlands are owned by farmers and landowners, and that's where our focus lies. That's kind of how we started, and that's how we mean to continue, is looking at income options for farmers. Again, we started in Mayo, but we are looking at converted peatlands, so pasture essentially, of which there's about 23%. And yeah, just to reiterate, so about 1.2 million hectares, or the same area, the same amount that's owned by farmers and other landowners, is estimated to be degraded to a greater or lesser extent. And there's huge carbon stores involved, not quite as much as in Scotland, but an estimated 2.2 billion tons, or 70% of our soil carbon. So that would be equivalent to about six to seven times of what we have in our forests. Sorry, just omitting some latecomers. Hard to, okay. So, right, okay then. Right, okay. So just, I said, who are GRI? What are we doing? Well, I suppose we started out in Mayo. We kind of jumped into the space. We had a feeling that there was a lot of owners, there's a lot of abandoned peatlands in Ireland. We had the feeling that there was a lot of people that wanted to with the right help and advice, would be interested in doing some restoration work. So that's what we did. So just on the left here, you can see a bog we worked on near Charlestown in East Mayo, and we helped the landowner there do the first re-wetting of a 20-hectare block of that raised bog. And then subsequent to that, we obtained the EAP we put in for, and we obtained the farm carbon EIP. And the focus of this call is essentially on those 340,000 hectares or so of peat grasslands, which are estimated to emit between 15 and 30 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. And it's all a function of how deeply drained they are. So it could be the biggest single source of emissions in the country. So a very big problem. Just so you can see on the top right here, this is kind of where we're our core area. So we were looking for farmers with peat grasslands within the catchment of the Little Brosna, the Kamka, or the Silver River, or flowing from the Slieve Blue Mountains. You can see here to the right. And this is well, you'll be seeing Donny Regan shortly, but this is his farm over in the west on the Little Brosna. And this is very typical of what we were dealing with in terms of the farm. So we have and here's Donny now. There we go. So all the farmers had peat grasslands because they also have a bit of bog in, good, bad, indifferent condition. They all had some cut over. They all had cut over scrub and woodland, and they had peat grassland. And also quite a lot of them have plantation forestry. So we have a lot of, about 48% of our forestry is on peat. So this is a big issue as well. And we collaborate. We're cooperative. So we're cooperative by name, cooperative by nature. So you can just see on the right, we have one of the farms has a National Soil Carbon Observatory tower on. We work with the Rewet project with Chuggask, looking at how effectively can we raise the water table on these peat grassland fields. And we adopt a whole farm approach. So essentially what we do is look at all aspects of the farm, not just the peat grasslands, and we give the farmers a list of measures that would improve the biodiversity, the carbon storage, and the productivity, and hopefully, and also the cost effectiveness of their farm, and then we help them do it essentially. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm just going to go on. Yeah, so we do before and after studies. So we've done baselines. Obviously, the main focus of the research work was on the peat areas. So we surveyed about 170 to 180 hectares of all the different peatland habitats. So we depthed them, we determined how much carbon was therein, so about 280,000 tons of carbon. And depending on, and this is where the emission factors come in, depending on which ones are used, there's probably anything from 700 to 1,000 tons CO2 annual emissions from those areas. And as I said, there's about 20 or so farms in those areas, and they have all those different types of peatland habitats. And so far we've reweighted about 15 hectares or more of peat grasslands, but also the adjacent cut over woodland, because we saw it as a good opportunity to do good environmental work as well, not just look at the farm side, but the farming is key, but there's also great opportunities to do good work on maybe the less productive areas or the non-productive areas of the farms. So just how did we end up looking at paludiculture? So one of the things that we did, or we set out to do, was to come up with a method for quantifying emissions from the peat grasslands. So Bastian, who's going to be talking shortly, he compiled, the way he did this, you can see the graph in the top right, he compiled all of the Dutch data, the UK data, and a bit of Irish peat grassland data, and essentially all fits on the same straight line. So essentially we were able to say that for every 10 centimeters variation in the water table, there's effectively a difference of 5 tons per CO2 per hectare per year. And also the other thing that Bastian identified was that up to about 40 centimeters below is essentially business as usual. So a lot of the fields would be drained to a meter or more. And, we estimate that could go to 40 below without changing anything going on the field surface. But then, of course, the question arises. So that's going to, as you can see in the bottom right, if we had a hypothetical 60 centimeters below for all of those 300,000 plus hectares of farmland, raised to 40, that would be equivalent to 3 million tons or more, or 5% of Ireland's total annual greenhouse gas emissions. So again, that's hypothetical, but the question is, there's still emissions going on. So what can we do? And then the obvious answer is paludiculture. And this is Donny's farm here, laid out with all the measures we're doing on it. So he'll be talking about that. And as I said, the key focus of our key interest really is, how can we help farmers diversify their incomes and to focus on the high value options that will help farmers stay on the land farming. Okay, I think oh yeah, sorry. And then just lastly, different rewedging options that we're looking at. So in terms of the grasslands, so the kind of the summer grazing fields, those are only used periodically throughout the year. We were able to do a full water table raising right up to the surface. But then for the more productive fields, maybe the ones that have been reseeded with ryegrass, it was kind of halfway. So we have different options. And again, we just go, it's purely voluntary. So whatever the farmer wants to do, we work with them and do it with them. And then they can get familiar with the different, these changes in farming practices, which is really going against the grain, given that, you know, their predecessors would have spent so much time draining them. Now we're going away from dry land to wetland farming. And then you can just see some of the pictures before I hand you over the bastions. So, you know, people ask, well, what can you do on wet peat? And of course, the answer is a lot. So what we have done on Donny's farm is very much we set out a shop window of all the different things you can look at. So we have our vegetables, you can see some soup celery there in the middle. We have blueberries there on Adrian's farm. We have different types of paludiculture forestry trees to produce commercial timber. We have the fruit option. So essentially, we're just looking at these things, but of course, with a focus particularly on the grass, because that's what Irish, you know, for livestock farming, that's what's required. You know, wet multi-species swards and other fodder crops, but also all the other things which have much higher values that Bastien is going to be talking to you about. Okay, so I think at that point I can hand you over into Bastien's very capable hands. So Paludiculture, Bastien, if you please.
Right, thanks, Doug. Hi, everybody, welcome. So I'll be talking a little bit about, before I start talking about the crops, I'll explain a little bit what paludiculture exactly is, why I would be interested in it, and then I'll go on to the crops. So paludiculture is a term coined in 2007 by Greifswald University. It's a combination of the words palus, meaning swamp or marsh in Latin, and agriculture, meaning agriculture. So essentially it means agriculture on forestry or peatlands, but not just any, on peatlands, not just any peatlands, but wet peatlands, peatlands with the water table that is high or raised almost to the surface, and in the summer should be no lower than 20 centimeters. And this is very different from the conventional type of agriculture that is right now being performed on peatlands. As Doug already hinted at, most peatlands, when they're under cultivation, they'll be drained. And you do this to make the soil firm, which is very nice. You can go there with your tractors, you can go there with your cattle without trampling down the soil. And also when you drain your peat, the degradation of the peat releases the nutrients that have been trapped in peat over centuries. And this gives you a an excellent, well, let's say natural or automatic fertilization that goes on like without you needing to do anything for it. Next slide, please.
Sorry. Oh, sorry there.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. So
sorry, just having technical issues. Yeah, we're good now.
Yeah. All right. So besides the nutrients that are released by the degrading peat, there's also a lot of carbon being released by the degraded peat. This in the form of CO2, right up into the atmosphere, causing all the climate changes that we are well aware of these days, but also releasing carbon into our waterways in the form of dissolved carbon and also solid bits of carbon, and especially the last one can really be a lot. And as a consequence of this carbon release, drained peatlands in Ireland alone, are estimated to release about between 3 and 9 million tons of CO2 per year, which is equivalent to 5 or 15% of the national greenhouse gas emissions in Ireland. So 5 to 15% of the national budget can be attributed simply to these drained peatlands. Now, that is a really wide margin. The reason for this is that we don't really have good information on how deeply drained these peatlands are. And as you can see, the graph that I made and Doug already showed, and another graph here on the right, the deeper you drain, the more CO2 emissions you have. So it's crucial information that's unfortunately just not available. And besides the effects for your climate, you as a landowner immediately or in time will also feel the consequence of these CO2 emissions, because since peat is almost pure carbon, the CO2 emissions mean that your land is quite literally just going up into the air. This leads to your soil disappearing from under your feet, and the soil subsidence in very deeply drained soils can be as high as 2 centimeters per year. And there's like this really striking image that you see of a bunker built in World War II, or right before World War II, and over the last 70 years, the soil has sunk down, and right now you can see the foundations are completely exposed. So this just really demonstrates that this is something that goes on year after year, and you really see it's a tremendous effect in the landscape. But also at some point the peat's just going to be gone, and you're going to be left with the stuff that's underneath, which is not good news generally. Luckily, all these negative effects can very easily be halted by raising the water table. If you do that, if you put the water back into its original position at the surface of the peat, CO2 emissions, soil subsidence, they're going to stop overnight. So we're not lost. However, can I go to the next slide?
Just before we do, just to clarify those figures, Bastian, I think that's just for the drained peat grasslands. So there would also be emissions from the intact peatlands as well.
Yeah. Whatever.
So the you know, the actual bogs and fens. So that's actually just from the peat grassland area.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the real picture is worse than that even. All right. Right. So when you put the water back on the surface, you are going to lose all those benefits that you get from drainage, right? The firmness of the soil, you're going to lose that. You're going to have a very low bearing capacity. And this means that when you access the field with your tractor, with your cattle, you're going to damage the field. As you see in the pictures here, left is damage trampling by cattle, and on the right is the sward damage by tractor after spreading fertilizer. So that's something you're going to have to deal with. Now, as the soil dries out in the summer, the bearing capacity is going to rise, and there are some figures that you can attach to the bearing capacity to see when you can access the field. Different numbers are used, but in general, the real safety margin is 0.7 kilograms per square centimeter. If you go below that, you're going to have a yield loss due to poaching. Now, this, again, all of this concerns grassland, so access by cattle is generally not going to be very interesting for other types of cultivation, perspective of the peat grasslands in Ireland. And so when you put the certain correlations next to each other, you can kind of predict that for good bearing capacity, for a firm soil, you need drainage of about 50 centimeters below the surface. And I've plotted here some water table data for re-wetted soils. And you can see that minus 50 centimeters is something you're just never gonna achieve. So yield loss due to poaching is unfortunately something that you are going to have to deal with if you want grassland on re-wetted peat. Can we go to the next slide? So besides the problems with the bearing capacity, there's also the soil chemistry. As I said, when your peat degrades, you're releasing a lot of nutrients, mainly nitrogen. And when you re-wet peat, this automatic availability of your nitrogen disappears kind of. So you can see here on the right, the nitrogen uptake of an unfertilized peat grassland. As the water table is raised, the nitrogen uptake goes down and keeps going down. And you can see that represented in the dry matter production. So your grass yield, that at lower water tables, or let's say water tables closer to the surface, your yield is going to be much lower as a consequence of the lower nitrogen availability. However, if you apply fertilizer, this can be almost completely compensated for. The additional problems with a re-wetted peatland is that the land is simply water saturated, which means no oxygen availability, which unfortunately roots of most plants, well, all plant roots need that. Most plant roots need to get that from the soil. So if that's not available there, it's going to be a problem, and in many cases also lead to root rot. So when we're talking about paludiculture, we really need to think about alternative crops, or in the very least, alternative farming models. Can I go to the next slide? So what I'm going to be, the crops that I will be highlight today are grassland, which is simply very important in the Irish context. A lot of the farmers in our project are cattle farmers, either for beef or for dairy. They want to remain cattle farmers, and that's why grassland is an absolute must to be looking at. But if you do wish to diversify, then we are going to additionally highlight here sphagnum, typha, and soft fruits, which for us at this moment are kind of the most accessible and promising options you have out there for paludiculture. There are a lot of other crops available. Think about wet forestry with alder and willows, but they can maybe be discussed in a future webinar. Right now, we're going to focus on this because we only have so much time. Next slide, please. Right, so let's start with grassland. There we see like three things that you can do. We can start, sorry, there's the option of a partial rewetting where the average water level is around 30 centimeters below the surface, or maybe the water level in the drains could be 30 centimeters below the surface. And this will have as a consequence that in the winter, your water level under the soil will be a little bit higher than that, so maybe -20. And in the summer, it will be a little bit lower than that, maybe -40. So if you compare this to the bearing capacity graphs that we've seen above, there's going to be some yield loss as a result of poaching by the cattle. But you can still practice agriculture in the way that you've been practicing, although it at a reduced productivity, about 4 to 7 tons of dry matter per hectares. I think right now the figures for Ireland are 10 tons of dry matter is considered a good productive farm. So 4 to 7 tons is definitely a significant reduction with respect to that. However, you do reduce CO2 emissions to some extent, maybe 10, maybe 15 tons per hectare reduction. And in our current project, we are allowed to give a financial compensation for the mitigated emissions. In the future, the carbon market is expected to develop, so this can compensate the reduced productivity to some extent. In the Netherlands, they're running a big project right now where they're going a bit of a more technological way, where they have rewetted the land to 20 centimeters below the surface. Now, this is a real paludiculture according to the Greifswald definition. But in order to keep it that way, in order to soften the rise of the water level in the winter and the drop of the water level in the summer, they have really closely spaced subsurface drains, which irrigate the soil from below in the summer and which really actively drain the soil in the winter. So the bearing capacity stays at approximately the right level, and the yields, as far as I've been able to see in the reports, are very, very comparable to conventional agriculture. So if you have a highly profitable farm, this might be an option for you, because of course this subsurface drainage represents a significant investment, so it has to be worthwhile. And then finally, let's say that the least productive and the most climate-friendly option would be full rewetting. In this scenario, there would be no drainage whatsoever. It means that in the winter, the water would be really close to the surface or at the surface even. And in the summer, you'd have like maybe 20 centimeters below the surface. So still the soil might be relatively weak. On the plus side, you have near zero emissions, and you can exploit fields like this with extensive agriculture using summer grazing. The yield reports that I've seen are between 2 and 5 tons of dry matter per hectare. It's a pretty big spread. So we're looking to maybe go to the upside of that. If we can go to the next slide. So to kind of go more towards the 5 tons of dry matter rather than the 2 tons of dry matter per hectare, we're working on sward selection, which means selecting water-tolerant grass species that are still relatively productive. We're looking at grass species that form a very dense sward, which can increase the bearing capacity. And this is not just a fantasy, it's a real thing. Grasses with a lot of tillering roots, they really improve the bearing capacity of soils. And then we're trying to compensate the loss of nitrogen release by the degrading peat, by incorporating nitrogen fixers such as clovers into the field. And we have 2 experiments running right now. The results are going to be coming in this year as we're going to start harvesting those fields. So it's going to be very exciting to see what happens. Right now, I'm not aware of anybody trying to optimize productivity on a fully re-wetted grassland. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to present these kinds of results in a coming webinar. Another option to improve, especially bearing capacity, but also food quality or feed quality, is grassland management. And one option that we're currently investigating is Kurzrasen. It's a German type of grazing where the cows are keeping the grass at 4 to 6 centimeters constantly. Growth is a little bit slower, but the grass is a little bit more nutritious, which might be an advantage because a lot of these more water tolerant species are less protein rich. So that's something that can maybe synergize a little bit with the Kurzrasen. And then this system of grazing has really shown to increase sward density and bearing capacity significantly. So it's not sure how well that's going to work, but it's something we're very excited about trying out in the coming year. I go to the next slide. Right, so the next crop we're going to be talking about is bog moss, sphagnum. It's the dominant plant species in raised bogs. And because its natural habitat is these raised bogs, it's highly tolerant to all the conditions that you might find there: waterlogging, low nutrient conditions, acidity. So if nothing else grows, this will grow as long as you have access to enough water. It has some very promising applications. It can be used as a horticultural substrate. Right now, a lot of horticultural substrate is ancient or buried peat, which is just being mined out and leads to on the longer term to a lot of CO2 emissions as well, besides destroying natural peatlands. So there's a lot of interest in producing this kind of substrate in a sustainable way. And it's been estimated that about 1,000 euros per hectare is the range of farmer income that you can get from this type of production. And then, in addition, there is the specialty horticultural substrate, specifically substrate for propagation of orchids. This is quite a big industry in China, and there are reports of farmer income, not revenue, but farmer income, to be 15,000 euros per hectare. So this is an incredible amount. And maybe labor is very cheap there, which might help this amount a little bit, but still, this seems a very, very promising option. And just if you doubt that number, if we look at the productivity of sphagnum, the global average is 2.6 tons per hectare, can be up to 10 tons under the right conditions. And if you simply Google sphagnum on Google Shopping or on Amazon, you will see prices starting at 20 euros per kilogram. So the 15,000 euros per hectare doesn't seem so incredibly far-fetched if you put those two numbers together. So a very, very promising option. Can we go to the next slide? Unfortunately, it's not so straightforward. Bog moss has its challenges. It's intolerant to drought, to eutrophication, to high pH. So the very conditions that we see in bogs are great for it. But if there's a dry summer, for example, you will need to irrigate, especially during establishment. And then you have to make sure that you have access to water of good quality, so low nutrients, low pH, because if you don't, you might poison the sphagnum, or it might be overrun by weeds. So cultivation is not very simple. Seeding of the sphagnum can also be problematic. We ourselves have collected seed material in a bit of bog that one of our farmers had. This took an incredible amount of time. If you want to sow a hectare, you're talking about weeks and weeks of gathering and spreading the sphagnum. There are companies who do this, but they are incredibly expensive. And then if this sphagnum cultivation really blows up, seed material might simply not be available. There's one company, I think, right now who does this. So there's definitely room in the market for more. But right now, I think there's only so much capacity that they would have. And then there's harvesting and processing. The soil under bog moss is incredibly weak. So to put a tractor or any kind of machine in there to harvest it is complicated. You might damage the moss that you're driving on. And plus the mechanized yield will, the mechanized harvest will only yield the horticultural substrate. For the orchid substrate, you need long strands, which you just cannot get by the mechanized harvesting. This has been done, for example, in Chile with pitchforks, so it might not be for everybody. I think there's a lot of room here for some innovation and see if we can speed seeding and harvesting up. And then obviously there's stuff to figure out in relation to sterilization of the substrate. Horticultural substrate needs to be free of pesticides, needs to be free of weeds, needs to be free of fungus. So right now it's being steamed. That's going to make you dependent on a company that can do that for you. So, you know, that's obviously going to impact price. But all in all, you know, given the overall market value of sphagnum and the productivity and the conditions that you'd have in Ireland as well, I think this is a very, very promising crop. Next slide, please.
Sorry, there we go. Yep. Oops. Sorry there.
Yeah, and just
sorry,
some examples. In Canada, there so bog moss cultivation hasn't really taken off in maples. Sorry, bog moss cultivation hasn't really taken off in Europe yet. In Canada, it's being harvested from existing peat bogs, and they're being reseeded then after that for fast regrowth and production. About 30,000 hectares. China is doing real artificial cultivation of sphagnum at about 2,000, a little bit more than 2,000 hectares. Finland is really starting their large-scale pilots right now, but they have an incredible area of suitable ground for cultivation. Sweden is very comparable, have a little bit less suitable area, or at least from what I found. In Germany is really the European leader in cultivation of sphagnum. They have 16 hectares of experimental sphagnum farming strips. UK, I think, is very much in initial stages, and Ireland has not a single sphagnum farming project right now. Plenty of peatland restoration. I think they're also interested in harvesting the sphagnum, or Port Namona might be interested in the future. But as of this moment, there's no sphagnum farm in Ireland. So I think there's, given the conditions that we have here, you know, very clean water, a lot of rainfall, plenty of residual bogs on the side of which sphagnum farming could be possible. Ireland is in a unique position to really start taking its place in the sphagnum farming market. And right now, demand is.
If I could just add to that, Bastian. So just in the UK, I think there's several hectare plots. And then, yeah, just to reiterate what you were saying, so in Ireland, obviously there'll be very large areas of, you know, land that would be suitable for sphagnum farming. But yeah, we haven't guesstimated it yet.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So next slide, the next crop. That is bulrush. It's one of the most developed paludiculture crops right now. It can be cultivated in very, very large areas. It thrives in wet conditions, and incredibly high yields are possible, up to 20 tons of dry matter per hectare. Cultivation, planting, and harvest, it's all kind of been mechanized, and existing agricultural machines have been adapted to facilitate this. So it's kind of ready to be rolled out on a large scale. And the crop has various potential markets. One interesting one that's come up recently is the seed heads of the bulrush, which you see in the picture there. They contain a kind of fluff. It can be used for textiles. There's a company which estimates that they can buy for about $3,000 per hectare. If you produce a ton of seed heads, I think that's about the estimate. They will buy that for $3,000. So interesting. The stems and the leaves are very suitable for local bio-based building materials. A lot of other paludiculture crops like reed and other kind of fibery long crops are also suitable for this, but Taifa has the additional advantage that it's hollow inside, which makes it additionally an insulator. So there's a Dutch building company that are profiling themselves now as they're spearheading cattails or bulrush as a building material. So the expectation is that the market will really grow a lot in the coming years. The building material has been certified, so right now I don't see a lot of things. The only thing stopping this at this moment, I think, is the availability of the material itself. And then obviously, if you are a first starter, seeds have additional value because there's going to be, if the market blows up, there's going to be a lot of need for seeds. And then some additional things that we're thinking about, which haven't really been investigated, is that the seeds might also have a good feed value for animals. The Taifa leaves and stems might be used as a packaging material. There's a lot of packaging material right now being based on polystyrene and other plastics. So there's a high need for sustainable packaging material. These signals have also come to us from the industry. And thirdly, we're working with a research project in the UK who is using biochar for carbon farming, so for carbon storage on rewetted peatlands itself. So this might also, given the really high yields that you can get with cattails, with bulrush, this might be an interesting option as well. Next slide, please. A couple challenges exist with bulrush. One is that it tends to grow in a layer of water. And if you really put the water not at the surface of the soil, but over the surface of the soil, then you are going to have to deal with strongly increased methane emissions. And methane is a much stronger greenhouse gas than CO2 is. So this, if you are trying to sell carbon credits, this is going to seriously cut into your on that side of your profits. On the other hand, if you are coming from a deeply drained 60 centimeters, say, soil, your CO2 mitigation is going to far outweigh the methane emissions. So it depends where you come from, and it depends what you prioritize. And then secondly, bulrush requires really a lot of nutrients to get these high yields. So that can be a problem. Fertilization of wet soil is currently not allowed. In other countries, such as the Netherlands, they're letting in dirty or eutrophied water into these lakes or fields of Taifa. But unfortunately, in Ireland, in many places, the water quality is a little bit too good. So in terms of productivity in Ireland, we can't really give any data or not even give any estimates because we just don't know. Next slide, please. And then finally, soft fruits. There's a very interesting example of a farm in the Netherlands. It used to be a peat pasture farm with cattle, and they stopped doing that. They completely re-wetted their soil, and they started growing cranberries. It is an 8-hectare farm, and they produce around 50 to 60 tons of cranberries per year. And they're keeping the water level high in the winter and slightly drained in the summer, about 25 centimeters below the surface. And according to all, I mean, of course, I don't know exactly how much the man makes, but all stories that I've heard about him is that he makes a very handsome living, and he's really an example for paludiculture in the Netherlands. So he's obviously a first starter, so he has no competition at the moment. Can probably cut into his profits a little bit if their competition starts to come up, but at the moment he's making a very nice living. And so that might be an option in Ireland as well. The other fruit that we are looking at is blueberries. They are tolerant to acidity, and that's why they're generally being grown on drain peat. Now, when you're looking into information about blueberry cultivation, good drainage is always recommended, but the literature shows that flood tolerant species exist. I've even seen reports of high bush blueberry, which is the common blueberry type in cultivation, survived 12 months of being flooded. So it's very clear that if you use a system such as the cranberry farm in the Netherlands, where you flood the soil in the winter, the plant's going to survive. And then if you drain it in the summer, slightly drain it in the summer, well, that's a big question mark, because the effect of flooding on fruit production, or the effect of a high water level on fruit production, is not well researched. Nevertheless, you know, the financial picture for blueberries, as painted by Chagask, at least, which is the agricultural research organization in Ireland, is very good. They're talking about 35,000 euros of farm gate value per hectare. So a very nice number. The productivity associated to that is 20 tons per hectare. So if we look at the cranberries of Bad Krauwers, that might be maybe 50% less for blueberries. Sounds reasonable, I think. When you look at the grass as well, you go from 10 tons to maybe 5 tons in a fully re-wetted field. So 50% seems a reasonable number. So this is something we're going to look into also in the coming year. We're looking for projects to help us finance larger plantations of blueberries. We have some planted. They appear to be doing well, but to really evaluate fruit production, it's going to take a while. I think that's all for me. I'm going to hand you over to our farmers, which would like to tell you something about the work we've been doing at their farm.
So yeah, so Donny, Adrian, I don't know who wants to go first. Just slightly senior Donny, maybe you want to go ahead, perhaps, but I don't know, Adrian, who would like to come in there?
Yeah, go ahead, Donny.
Donny, you're being volunteered.
I think Donny's on mute.
Oh, is he on mute? Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
perfectly.
All right.
Thanks,
Now,
Donny. Yeah.
yeah, I suppose we're one of the 23 odd farmers that's involved in it. It's going on a couple of years now, and we got the letter out, I suppose, and we decided we'd go for it and see. I suppose originally we would have around 36 acres of land, and 12.5 acres of that is bog. And originally, back in the early 80s, we would have deepened the water course along adjacent to the bog with a view to actually draining it. But we didn't in the finish anyway. And when this came on board, so we said we'd try it and see what happens. So I suppose in consultation with Doug and a few more of them, we went down the road, and we have a number of, I suppose, ponds done. We have, I think it's 8 plots there with vegetables, fruit bushes, all the different. We have the blueberries and all those, and cranberries, and we have 8 dip wells in it. Now we did during that course of that time, I suppose, we have those, all the fruit growing in that. Some went well, some didn't go well. We have the rhubarb there as well. And what did we do? We put in 5.5 acres of multi-species grasses last September. So we're waiting to see how that develops during this summer. We also did what did we do? We laid a hedge as well, and as a continuation, I suppose it's really it's a job in progress, really, and we're the longer it goes on, the better for us. I'd love to see it taking place. We're very happy with everything is going. Very different than what we were at, but very, very well worthwhile. Now we have, as Adrian would know himself as well, we would have lots of different people calling and looking at the different things, and that's great as well, because it gives us an interest in it, and it gives us, we get an education out of it as well, to know what's actually good or bad. So overall, I suppose we would be delighted with the way it's going, and long may it continue. And I suppose we'd want to see it developing more and more.
And what's your view on paludiculture, Donny? Just could you give us a bit of feedback on that? What do you see as the potential?
As I said, we were on for draining the bog and draining the soil, and we've done the full circle. And now we have, as I said, we have 2 of the drains blocked on the bog. We'll see how things go there. We're happy enough at the moment, and we're open for anything, to be quite honest with you. And see, look, we'll see how things go. We'll work along with Doug and his team, and we work together on it. And we're just we'll see how it goes. And so far, we're delighted. Absolutely.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah.
Want to hand over to Adrian then?
Yeah. One second. Is that
Oh,
okay?
yeah. Very good. We got you. Yeah.
How are you doing, Kieran? My dad's here as well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Hi, Kieran.
Kieran.
Hello. How are you? Yeah, much like Donny covered.
Numbers.
Sorry.
Safety in numbers.
Yeah, yeah. Donny pretty much covered everything there, really. Covered it very well. I'd be delighted with it as well, and Dad as well. Like that, my dad spent most of his life draining that land, so it was a bit of a challenge to get our heads around re-wetting it. But after re-wetting it, it's after bringing it back to life, really. Even I was down there this morning, and the birds were singing, and there's a lot of life down there compared to what there was years ago. Even just in the space of 3 years, how it's transformed. And then I suppose the fact that you get to grow different crops that could be the food for the future, really, the way with last summer being so wet. It started off very dry and then got so wet that maybe we have to adapt our ways of farming and look at what we might need to be doing in the future, really. And it's just like that. I find it very interesting to see what is growing, what's not growing. The blueberries are doing very well. There's some grass that's doing very well. Cranberries are doing well. And I look forward to learning more this year and getting more done.
And what do you think is the most promising, Adrian, Kieran? What do you think? Because as I said, blueberries wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea. So I think we think the grass is important, but blueberries is going to be the new crop for Offaly, is it?
Yeah, I think so. Well, the thing with blueberries is anytime you buy a pack of blueberries here in Ireland, it says come from Peru or Colombia, and like they actually do grow well in this country. So like I can't see why we need to import something that does grow well here in Ireland. As for the grasses, my own belief in the grasses is Ireland has enough grassland. We've produced enough grass to feed all of Europe with beef for the last 30 years. So I think it's time we change our ways of farming and go more for food for the future for ourselves. That's my true belief. I think Ireland's importing too much food. We need to look at producing more as an island. We should be producing more, really. That's definitely.
Yeah, well, we imported 95% of the fruit and veg or something, isn't it? That's the figure, I think.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Fairly ridiculous. Yeah,
Yeah.
Brilliant. So just from what you were saying and what you were highlighting there, Adrian, is kind of like the added value, really. I suppose we're looking at it from the farming point of view, but besides the carbon, you were highlighting already the biodiversity benefit. These are additional benefits of doing this. It really is a new kind of farming. The whole look of it is different. And as you said, the biodiversity is everywhere. It's also great for the water quality. So again, we think that, besides the commercial value of the crops, down the line, everyone's talking about carbon and nature credits. This is the bee's knees, it doesn't get any better. So, there should be an opportunity for overlaying different income sources from doing this. But again, that isn't the focus of Paludiculture, but it's just kind of a really good side effect, I suppose.
Yeah, and even like on top of that, you're actually enjoying it more. Like even just being there, hearing the birds singing down this morning and the peace, and even just mentally what it do for you. It's simple things like really that actually pay bigger than money in some cases.
Great. Yeah.
Tony, do you have something else to say there? Or?
No, exactly what Adrian is saying. Like, it's amazing. You go out, I suppose, in the morning or in the evening, and you hear the birds singing. Like that wasn't there a couple of years ago. We'd hear a few, and I'd have the app there, the Merlin app, and the next thing you're starting to locate birds that you hadn't have heard of before, really. And I suppose the same as Adrian said in relation to the blueberries, like blueberries are coming in from Peru, they're coming in from everywhere, but there is no comparison with the taste of the blueberries that are coming in compared to the ones, like we only had a few growing last year, it was our first year, but just incredible. And I think the younger generation of farmer will probably, I suppose, they'll diversify. Like the older generation probably won't. Adrian's age group will definitely will anyway. I'm on the other end of the spectrum, I suppose, but definitely I think the younger generation will look at it completely different in relation to biodiversity, in relation to paludiculture, everything. It's not going to be just a straight, well, my father or my uncles or whatever did beef, I'll do beef. I think there's no doubt about it. The younger generation have more diversification, and so be it. And I hope so.
Brilliant.